What's good, everybody? My name's Alckemy. Welcome to the channel. Today, you and I are going to be checking out Minimal Audio's latest plugin, which is called Current. This thing is super sick. They did send me this plugin, but they did not pay me. So with that, I can be as unbiased as I want to. I've got some really cool pros to show you about this. I've got a couple of cons that I would like to see them fix in the future. I think it's definitely doable. But with that out of the way, please like the video, please subscribe, help me get to 20,000 before the end of 2023. Let's go ahead and dive into Current to see if this is something that is interesting to you. And I will talk about like 2 feature wish lists that I would love to see them implement at a future update. So with that being said, we've got wavetables, 2 engines. We've got a granular engine. You can change the shape, the position. There's a bunch of different controls here. You've got a semi additive sub engine, which I think is really cool. Then you've also got a typical sampler. You've got 2 filters over on the right. You've got some morphing that you can use. You've got key tracking. You can select which filters go into when and where to change if they're either serial or parallel. And then you've got an FM engine, which is over on the right, that's dedicated, which I think is actually a little bit cleaner anyways, to say, okay, well, I want A to go into B, or I want A to go into A, or I want A to go into B, and then B and A, which is really cool. You can change in between FM and AM, and then you can obviously FM, well, any of the 5 engines that they have. It's pretty sick. So with that being said, the biggest thing for me that I think is super cool about this plugin is morph EQ, riff distortion, fuse compressor, cluster delay. And not only that, but it's the full version of each of these inside of the effects. And so if you're familiar with their plugins, you know that these are very popular. They're very high quality. I had a couple of complaints about the morph EQ specifically lacking modulators that I thought was really important. But now within this being in a single engine, you could just, set something here and there you go. So now whenever you select morph or whatever, this will kind of flip over and you can, essentially morph these back and forth in between. It's the full thing. That's super cool. And one of the things that I wanted to mention that I absolutely love about this plugin is that every single effect has a clipper built into it. That is, I think that you're going to be able to make such dope drums out of this. And because this is a obviously different design or whatever, you can have multiple instances of these effects, which is relatively unique compared to the other 2, super popular synthesizers that are out there that, this kind of is inspired from, if you will. So with that being said, there's a lot to get into here. There is an arpeggiator that's built in. There is a chord that's built in. I hope that in the future they add augmented and then also diminished chords or whatever. You can drop or add basically these 2 to where you can drop a root or a third or a fifth, or you can add a 7th and a 9th, and you can change it to be an octave up or down. With this, you can also make it strum. You can kind of just randomize these, and then you can also pick a scale over on the right. I'd love to see more scales, like what's my favorite one right now? Romanian Phrygian or something like that, or Spanish Phrygian. I don't know. I've been playing a lot of Blasphemous too, and really just love those kind of 2 notes, man. Just dun 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 dun. Right. So with that being said, though, this is definitely like the main ones, and there's more than enough to work with between these modes. But that's pretty sick. You can lock that if you want to. Here's your mono, here's your glide. There is MPE, so you've got aftertouch and all of this over here as well, but you do also have access to, where is it? It's somewhere over here, maybe in mod, velocity, pitch bend. There it is. So your MPE tab is over here, so if you want to add that kind of stuff there, then you can control it via that. It's a little bit hidden. It would be nice if that was a little bit easier to see, but it exists, it's there. And then with your arpeggiator, you've also got quite a few different options, which I think that they've added since the update of the beta. You can change the steps, the shift, you can choose between alternate or offset. You've got different things here with classic, and then you can change the length. And I really like this in particular because this changes how it's actually played. And one of my biggest feature wish lists or something for the arpeggiator specifically was to be able to like offset it and make it not just swing, but make it like move off. And it seems to me like there is more than enough options here in which to do that. I actually have an Oxy 1 sequencer, which I have actually been enjoying quite a bit. And to be able to kind of just have this within a synthesizer is really nice. And as you can see, this is, let me just turn these off, kind of looking like an OP1 or something of the sort, which I think is really cool. And yeah, it's super nice. So within all that, the number one thing that I hope that they add in the future, which we'll talk about this in just a second, is that there is no wavetable maker. Even though there is no wavetable maker, they have this thing called Stream, to where, for one, you can import your own wavetables, which is great. But two, if you have any of the sample packs from Minimal Audio, then there's this ecosystem that they created to where it'll sync up and you can actually download the sounds into, like, directly into Current while you are working. And so you don't have to drag it from an external source. You don't have to do anything of the sort, because everything is on a unified account. You know, let's say, like, I'm like, oh, I'm in the market for, I don't know, a new wavetable or something, as you can see here. Well, I can find something that's kind of digital. I can kind of audition that. Great. And then I can just go, boom, download it, and there you go. And then I can save it as a favorite, or I can just drop it into oscillator A or B. I would love there to be a wavetable maker. That's really important for me, because just part of the way that I do a lot of sound design and whatnot. But even still, it's really cool that, like, if you pick up their expansions or whatever, that there's this integration added, kind of like how the Cube does, that allows you to kind of make everything work together from Minimal Audio. And that's something that I actually appreciate about them, is that I think that everything that they're doing is meant to work with each other. And if you know me and the way that I put out presets, kind of like Eternum with all the racks and stuff, right? Like, this is an implementation of that. Or I think that this is not inspired from, because they didn't even really know who I was prior, but that's super cool. You know, they're like, hey, if you buy this, it also works with this. It also applies to this. Same thing, you know, if you're familiar with this stuff, then it's super sick that you can just be like, yo, I'm going to stack 6 fuse compressors, and instead of having to have 5 different filters, you can just create a super morph filter, kind of like so, and then be able to, you know, morph in between all of these. You can see that there's no tab open on this, and that's because I haven't set any paths for these yet. So if we were to just do that, there you go, that'll open up. But with that being said, you know, now that we have this, we can set this randomizer on here and just kind of let it go and create really cool complex basses and stuff, and filtering for whatever it is that we got going on. This is so cool to me, because to me, like, this is a bass designer's synthesizer. You definitely can make other stuff with this. You definitely can make pads and whatever. It's got a granular engine, great for all that kind of stuff. But for me in particular, for morphing, you know, band passes and notches right here in this region, and then being able to say, okay, on this LFO, we are going to make it consistent, but then I'm going to set this to a macro over here, something hypothetically, and be like, all right, now I want this to be random. And now it's going to do some whole other stuff that's going to, you know, make this movement morph between something consistent and then something that is stable. You can kind of do something like this in Faceplant, to where if you have a stable LFO and you have the depth, then you can randomize the depth to where it'll be kind of like this or whatever, or you can, I guess, modulate the random of a wavetable LFO or whatever. But for this in particular, it's a little bit different, because this is saying it's a consistent shape. Now it's going to be completely random. Now it's going to be completely kind of modular in that way. And I guess it can be a matter of, you know, sine waves and curves and whatever. I digress. But even still, this is nice that this is super conveniently set up in that way. If you are more interested in creating, you know, serum type LFOs, then you just go to curve, and this is very easy to implement. You double click anywhere, you know, stuff that you're typically used to seeing. This will randomize if you want it to, so you can kind of flip in between all of these, although these randomizations are just flipping through the presets of these guys. You can create your own, which is great. You know me, I'm all about modularity and being able to, like, make your own stuff. So anything and everything that you can kind of modulate, or that you can, you know, create a patch or a part of a patch and then save that, is very important to me as a sound designer and somebody that releases their own packs. So speaking of, kind of like Vital, you can create your own user packs. So if you got a bunch of presets that you're sitting on, you can compartmentalize all of them, or I guess compile them rather, all into a single file, which is super sick. And then from there is just it's fun. It's really fun to use, I'll say that much. I think the other thing that I would love to see in a future update is that there is no matrix table, as far as I know, and because of that, there's certain things that you can't modulate.
Recording to logbook.
Thank you. What I mean by that is, if I wanted to, say, modulate the octave of oscillator 1 because it's FMing oscillator B, there's not really any way to do that. You can do it with the pitch here, but I would love some of these to be able to kind of like turn off and on. And it's not that big of a deal, but if you had a matrix table or something to where you can at least kind of, you know what I'm saying, do that and then randomize that, or pick how much you want to randomize, because I do a lot of basses to where I have something that's an FM, but the FM ratio, and that's more so the bigger deal, is like an FM ratio of being up or down or whatever is constantly randomized, and then I'm randomizing the decay of that. So sometimes you might have a really metallic sound at the beginning and it evens out into the bass sound, or it might be a little bit lower, a little bit more tonal, and it kind of has a fast attack to where it's more percussive. So from saying that, there are workarounds to that, but it would just be a lot more convenient if that was available. The other things that I think are really cool about this is that you can remove the fundamental, which is great for making Reeses. So if I were to just speed run one, let's just say we're here, we've got a saw wave, maybe. My computer needs to, there we go. So we take the fundamental off, we set the unison to 2. Then we want to make sure that the random is at 0 so that the way the phase is constant. And from here, we can kind of change this into a regular saw perhaps, or we can morph it using either the spectral or the pitch. So this is more of like sync and stuff, or sign folding, wrapping, shaping, bend, skew, like bend plus and minus, sync, press, tons of stuff within this, but lots of really interesting kind of waveform shaping stuff. Now, as you can hear, there's not really any bass on it, so what I can do is just open up the sub oscillator here and turn that on and just tab over, and we can use this in order to create a nice low end. Maybe with this, I want to back off of all of these and just have something relatively normal. So I'll go into all, user, saw, create a more traditional one. And now from this, I can detune this. And I've got a really fat sound, and I'm not really even doing anything. So with that, I mean, it's very easy to set up a really nice and fat bass patch that you don't have to do a lot of work into getting something cool. So for example, if maybe let's say we wanted to, I don't know, let's just make a very fast neuro bass or something. What I'm going to do is add an instance of the riff distortion. One thing that I'm going to do in between each of these steps is just create a clip. And now from this, we can pull up the Morphe EQ, and I'm going to just double click. This is going to kind of do something like this. We'll set up another one that'll be more so of a notch here. We're not going to get too complicated with this, but just something of the sort. We can kind of sweep down this region. And I love too that I can just tell it where I want it to go, as opposed to having to modulate depth and stuff with that. And even though, you know, for this in particular, it's kind of quirky in some ways, it still is really nice that you do have a means of control whenever you start just kind of morphing stuff through, kind of like this. I'm going to set this to a peak, so that way it's going to pop up, kind of like so. And then finally, I am going to finish this off with a low pass. So this will kind of, it's a little finicky. You got to wait until it becomes orange. Until it becomes a plus button like that. But we can kind of set this to zigzag, kind of like this. I haven't done much, and you can already hear that it's starting to get, you know, kind of nice. And so with this, we can add in a fuse compressor. And then all I'm going to do on this before you even touch that is I'm just going to add an LFO to the morph here. Kind of like so. And now I'll mess with this as an OTT that's built in. And remember, every single effect has a clipper that's built into it. We can clip this on a hole. And now I can mess with this and make sure that the dynamics of this are going to maintain the high end, but also have a nice, smooth overall kind of line across the board. Now you see these are kind of popping out, so we can kind of dip this over just a little bit. And now where the magic comes in is turning the threshold up as well as the ratio. And then if it's too much, we can kind of back off of this. So maybe something that could be nice too is we can grab the pitch bend on this and we can change the rate here. So we can kind of set this up. Then if we pop out of this and we go into a bend, we can set this to 24. And so now anytime that we use the pitch bend, this is going to modulate this wheel into a faster rate. So, you know, this is very typical stuff. You've probably seen me do this before on, you know, different kinds of patches and stuff, but it's very easy to kind of work with. Let's go ahead and pump this up just a little bit more. What's also really cool is we can actually pull back off of this just a little bit, and what this will do is actually keep in some high end. So now one thing that I want to do is I want this to be a little bit slower. And then if I wanted to, I can continue to make this cooler as well just by adding in a couple of other effects. So I can change this into free and set this to a very short decay time. Again, turn on that clipping. Wherever the feedback is, we want to kind of back off of that just a bit. I am going to put this high pass on here, which is really nice, into something like 100 Hertz, turn this all the way up. Feedback's over here, so we're going to back off of this. And one thing that you can also do is you can turn this on and add in an extra depth of how this behaves, say with a flanger or a phaser or something. I'm not really doing much to this. This is only a couple of effects, and this already sounds relatively large, at least for like a sub or like some subtle movement. Now, if I wanted to, I can just copy this over, I believe, or at the very least, I can save this as a patch and just say more for 1, and then pull this up, morph EQ, go back to the user, more for 1, there we go. We can apply this as well if we want, or we can set this to go in the opposite direction. So now these two are moving against each other, and then we can kind of just go along with this and do the exact same thing that I was talking about with stacking these. So we can apply a phaser on here, which is really cool. There's a randomized thing on this, which I really like. We can kind of set that over here, kind of move this around. Then we can add another fuse compressor, and there's quite a bit, yeah, that. Now I am curious, if we go back and we turn this fundamental back on, and maybe we turn off this, let's see how that reacts with the original sound. I do think that what I talked about before with the sub engine is actually better without a fundamental. Better with the fundamental and not a separate sub, because when you have a sub that's detuned, it will actually give you a cleaner pitching motion. But let's go ahead and set this up now, and we can start to modify some of these sounds to continue to, I don't know, just make it more interesting, but also give it more harmonics. Now, something that I would also like to do on this is I want to come into here and I want to turn the key tracking up just a little bit. So that way, whenever I pitch bend this up, it's actually going to move a little bit faster, I believe. So we might want to, I think here, let's try that. Maybe if we make it this way. And then also I'm going to come into the LFO4 and I'm going to make this go a little bit faster. So, because I want this to go really fast whenever I move this up. We're pretty much emulating a sampler type thing. And I guess now we need to play Goldilocks and figure out how far we actually need to go. So So if we wanted to, we can even get into this and implement some other movement. So we can turn the randomize on for one, and then also we can modulate maybe some depth of oscillator B. So we can turn that on, maybe just use a sine wave at a higher octave and just introduce a small amount. And then we can apply this here to where maybe we set this here and then just apply it maybe like that much or so and turn the level down. We can add another layer of complexity to this just by turning on the filter here. And depending on if you use a morpher or not, so if we go to morphing, maybe morph 12, sometimes we can even do something like this to where we are just going to manipulate this here as a whole and see what that does. We can change the cutoff and get to morphing like this. Now, one thing that I just realized is that we've got a bunch of width on this, so let's pull the width off of that, and now this should detune much better. So and for whatever reason, if, you know, I know that we lost a lot of width on there, but if we want to bring it back, then maybe we can put this fuse compressor back towards the end, and we can kind of just leave that there. And then we can just use a very small amount of reverb here, which both have a high pass and low pass. That's super awesome. We can turn the pre-delay off, and we can kind of mess with this to create a little bit of space. That's a lot of space. I don't think that we need that much, but that's pretty sick. We can also turn a ducker on, so we can say, all right, well, this is going to duck out, you know, say 50% or so. But that gives it just a little bit more space, and then we can push the threshold up, push the threshold up. I don't know if you could tell or not, but this is really aggressive. So maybe what we can do is pull this back up, maybe go 50% on this just to see what happens. Now let's go ahead and just go through the rate and see if we can get just a comfortable place of where this is moving. So maybe we want this to go a little bit lower. We can also set a mix on here as well, which is really cool. If we want to make these stereo, we can spread that out. I'm not going to do that, but you can see that I'm not really doing a whole lot that's like super intricate, but between this, especially if you're into neuro-based design, between the morphing filter, the cluster delay, even short amounts of reverb, and like just ungodly amounts of like over compression, you can get some really sick basses out of this. And then of course, for whatever reason, if you don't want to use the morph EQ, say you want to do something a little bit more traditional, just like a, sorry, I went right back to the same thing, just like a traditional filter here, to where, you know, maybe we want to set it up like this, we can do that too. Or we can even use something that's kind of like a bandpass, and this should drastically change the sound, but that's okay because we can kind of use the mix here to what's it called, to manipulate that. So if I go to here, we kind of just modulate this. Like, so just from messing with this, I'm sure that you can see that, and I'm not talking much because now I'm just kind of getting into design and playing with this, but there's a lot of different things that you can use here in order to create some really cool sounds. And they can be as subtle or as aggressive as you want them to be, but because there's so much, how do you say, like safety measures built in with the clippers and with the fuse compressors and all that stuff built in, like you can get into some really aggressive sounds with this. I'm still learning this as a whole and still messing around with this ecosystem and trying to, you know, find my flow within this. But at the same time, just the sheer amount of filters for one, because you can have like almost as many as you ever need for every instance of a Morph EQ. But more importantly, you also have the distortion and the compression at each step. So there's how many effects? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Did I count that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, so you've got 9 effects in between all of these that you can have, you know, 10 compressors or 10 distortions, and then at the end you just compress the end. Or maybe not. Maybe you don't want to compress it, but you want to clip it at the end. It's there for you to do so. So, like, I'm not even scratching the surface with like how crazy this can go. These are just a very basic example of some very basic bases, but it's not difficult to get in. And if you do take that processing on the outside, you can always add another instance of your fuse compressor, Morph EQ, or whatever. You know, for me, I'm curious as to what would happen if I send these through with my, you know, racks that I build for the kilohertz stuff. But having all of this power to start with, I think is a great point. I just noticed this, I didn't even realize, but you actually have some presets that are just racks. So you actually have rack presets. That is really cool. So I don't know if I wanted to maybe try something, maybe see if there's anything that's like bass related, which would be kind of cool. Drum destruct, crispy fry, crushed tails, filters, deep waves, droid dialect. I don't know. Let's just see what that does and watch that pull up. Okay, maybe try some of the other ones. So maybe Riptide. But how cool is that you can actually just save preset racks and, you know what I mean, just use that and be like, oh, I know that this chain works, or I know that, you know, these, because you have presets within the effects in themselves as well, which is really cool. You know, say you just want to pull all of those up and be like, recall that. That's really awesome. It makes me want an effect rack for this on its own, but even still, I think that this is great. And these effects are like premium effects. And I think that's the biggest difference between, I gotta say it, the difference between every other synthesizer out there is that the effects that are built into this are not just a typical filter, not just a typical distortion. Like, these are things that they sell as individual components. You know, this is a full 6-band multi-band compressor that, you know, is meant to, for me anyways, to replace an OTT. Also the Morph EQ or whatever, the riff distortion, right? People rave about that all the time. The cluster delay even has a lot of different settings that you can dive into with this. Like, these things are sold on their own because they're standalone devices, and to put them all within a single rack, it would be like, imagine if Trash 2 was in an effect rack or part of a synthesizer, but it's the whole thing of Trash 2. You know, I'm trying to think about some other things that might be like so crazy. That's not to knock the other synthesizers, but because these are so high quality, you're going to get some really high quality sounds. Now, does that mean that you need this? Absolutely not, because there's a bunch of other workarounds and a bunch of other ways to do this. But I will say that Current is dope, and I don't think that I need to prove that to you all, especially if you know a thing or two about sound design. It does have a couple of things that I wish, you know, there's no matrix table, there's no like in-depth modulation at the level that I want it to be. There's also no wavetable maker, which I would love to see in the future. But as a means of just getting a sound and, you know, going ham with it, this is something that I'm going to be using more. On top of Faceplant, of course. Like, Faceplant's my baby and whatever, but you know, but this is something that actually is a contender to pull my attention away because of the options that it has. Please add that wavetable maker. That would make my day. That would be super cool. But anyways, I hope that was interesting to you all. I had some fun, you know, just doing some very basic sounds on the fly. I know that I didn't have anything prepared, but I wanted to kind of just walk you through a typical workflow about how I would start putting things together or start shaping things. And, you know, with that, I mean, I guess one sound that I made on a different day when I first opened this thing up was the Dungeon Beast. This thing gets loud. I think that now the mic bleed is coming through my speakers, which almost never happens, but like you can get some fat sounds from this. And I don't think that Faceplant aside, every other synthesizer out there, to get something this fat, you'd have to put a lot of work into. At Falcon as well, I feel like, but even still, like, we don't talk about Falcon for various reasons. But anyways, go ahead, give it a try, you know, do some research, check out the videos, make sure that this is something that would be for you. Again, I'm not trying to sell you on this. This is just, hey, I'm going to have some fun with the synthesizer. Let me know what you all think in the comments. And thank you again to Minimal Audio for sending me a copy of this. I'm very grateful, and I think that we're going to have some fun. I'll see you all in the next one.